itself. We were established in 1968 as Congress sought to find a way to honor our 28th President, Woodrow Wilson. And in the end, they decided against another marble statue or a monument on the mall, and instead decided what they wanted to do was to create a living memorial. That's where you are today. And in creating that living memorial, they gave us an assignment to bring together both sides of Woodrow Wilson's life. He was the only president to have earned a PhD. And in his era, he was quite a prominent political scientist. Actually coached football at Wesleyan to show the range of his talents. Went on to be president of Princeton University, and then, of course, governor of New Jersey and a two-term president. And the assignment they gave us, as I said, was to bring both sides of his life together. That is, the people who were doing very good thinking, the best thinking about public policy, together with the people who are making and influencing policy. And I must say that advanced manufacturing is one of those topics that is going to play a really critical role in the future. I would say manufacturing in general fits that category as well. Advanced manufacturing will be particularly important, I think, for us as we translate ideas into competitive products and new processes. It's critical for the way we're going to pay our way in the world, which we have not been doing. And in many ways, it fits the general theme that we need to export more of what we produce. We're doing better on that. And we need to consume more of what we produce as well. When we export manufactured products, particularly the case of advanced manufacturing, they're bundled together with a number of high-value services that range from research to design to supply chain management. So to some extent, this idea of services on one side and manufacturing the other really doesn't describe an American reality. Well, we are delighted to have not only the director of the Science and Technology Policy Institute together with us today, but a full range of experts who have crafted this outstanding report on advanced manufacturing. I cannot resist the temptation to again quote President Kennedy. Never has so much talent been assembled in one place, except possibly when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Sally Ann Keller, the director of STIPI. This is how I've learned how to pronounce the acronym some time ago. And its home, the Defense Institute for Defense Analyses. Dr. Keller easily rhymes with stellar. It's a perfect description of her background. Undergraduate degrees in mathematics, PhD from, I believe, Iowa State in statistics. She's done statistical work with Los Alamos. She's been dean of engineering and a professor of statistics at Rice. I'm sort of already intimidated by this background. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Keller, who in turn will introduce the other parts of her team. And at the end of that, they will turn it back to me, and I'm going to introduce two outstanding commentators, and then we'll take some questions. Dr. Keller, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's really great to be here and to be able to introduce to you this really excellent report that I can't take a lot of credit for. I have to give the credit to my staff. And you will hear from several of them today during the course of the presentation, and we'll just sort of bring them up as we go along. What I think is interesting in the introduction is that there was a lot of language about advanced manufacturing, and I'm just curious, how many of you have a concrete definition of that in your head? All right, 3, 4. Okay, good. So the rest of you will be entertained. So let me give you a little bit of a sense of what we're going to do here. I'm going to give you just a short overview of the project, and then I will turn this over to Justin Scott, one of our research staff members, a material scientist, who will talk about converging trends. From there, we'll talk a little bit about enabling factors. Chris Weber will cover that territory. Nayani Gupta will cover future scenarios, and then Stephanie Shipp, who was the overall task lead on this project, will sum this up in the challenges and summaries. I'd just like to mention that there are several other of our colleagues who are here today that won't be speaking, but were a critical part of this as well. Pavia Lal, Meredith Blake, and Sharika Newsom. And, Mike Finnan. our biologists over there. Okay, so we did have a lot of fun putting this report together, but I think the most interesting thing to me as the director of the Institute was how this came about. My colleague, Larry Gershwin, came to visit me some time ago, almost 18 months ago now, along with his colleague, Frank Gotts. And they were from the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And so, it's kind of like, well, what are you guys doing here? Well, they explained to me that given the primary role of our institute is to really do the research support for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is the overarching umbrella for the S&T enterprise in the country. Well, OD&I is sort of that overarching entity for the Intel community, and they felt that it would be really useful to try to reach to a group who was really well connected with the external research community and was always looking internationally to get a feel for what this area of advanced manufacturing is all about, how might you define it, and in fact, how might it relate to international trends. And so we were thrilled to take that on. I think they thought we would bring an interesting new perspective into their community, and they were really clear that this was supposed to be looking at 3 really well-posed questions and that we needed to stay on track. The first one had to do with emerging trends. What are the critical emerging advanced manufacturing technologies of the future and why? The next one had to do with global trends. What are they and what's going on in other nations? And finally, the forecasting trends. What's going to be happening 10 years out, 20 years out? Now, these questions are easy enough to read. They're easy enough to understand, but they're incredibly complex to try to answer. So to do that, we decided that we needed to actually not just wander around in the literature. What we needed to do was to really put forward a structured plan to attack these important questions. And the first thing that we decided we needed to do was to define what advanced manufacturing means, or at least what it means in the context of this study. We did that through a lot of conversations and through some workshops. We needed to really collect whatever data we could, both quantitative and qualitative, that's out there to try to really get a good feel at what's going on internationally. How are the developing economies versus the developed economies? What's happening there? Are we seeing any differences in any trends? We needed to look as carefully as we could at all of the literature. We did take the opportunity to interview and work with a lot of experts and thought leaders in the field, both from major companies to simply people who had dedicated their life to the research in this area. And then finally, we needed to try to ground all of this in some scenarios so that we weren't just blown in the wind with what we were saying. So we started off with a lot of pain and a lot of argument to define what do we mean by advanced manufacturing. And the definition is here. And I think that it's really worth taking a second to look at it because it is a very rich definition. It's really looking at how do we improve existing or create entirely new materials, products, and processes. And this is using S&T, using tools and methods, a really high-performing workforce. And then how is this going to really impact innovation in business? So one of the things I would say that this report has done where others have not quite covered the same ground is that we were not simply looking at the factory floor and changes in the factory floor when it comes to manufacturing. We're looking at the entire enterprise here, how it goes from customers to the delivery of the product, the whole supply chain, and you're going to hear that over and over again. And we were really trying to look at this in a global context. We weren't trying to benchmark the U.S. against anything. We were really looking at this full global context. Well, the landscape is huge. So again, we reached to experts and colleagues to help us think through how do we focus ourselves so we can come forward with ultimately some scenarios and to codify some emerging trends that would be useful to the Director of National Intelligence and to us and to our colleagues. And so we decided that we needed to pick some technology areas. And to do that, we developed some criteria and asked ourselves which technology areas match up with some of this criteria that would allow us to really ground ourselves in those areas. And so you can see the criteria on your left. And then the technology areas, which will not be a surprise to you, were natural ones that emerged that we should look at. The semiconductor industry, advanced materials and integrated computational materials engineering, additive manufacturing, and synthetic biology. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Justin Scott, who will tell you where we came out in terms of converging trends.
All right, thank you, Sally. So I'm going to talk about the 5 converging trends that we identified in the report. But one quick thing I wanted to note before we begin, I just wanted to point out that you'll recognize some of these trends as being a little bit more established than others, but really the emphasis here is on the convergence of these trends. So what we see as being really important is the overlap and the synergies and really the trajectories with which you'll see these converging trends as they continue to emerge. So the first one here is actually the increasingly ubiquitous role of information technology. And here, just one of the classic examples of this is the integration or integrated sensing and feedback control, which right now is really being driven by sensors. So a couple examples here on the right, you'll see both miniaturization, flexibility, really just an increasing ubiquity of sensors throughout the manufacturing enterprise. And so these are really driving a significant amount of data. So we're seeing the need for management of high-speed, real-time, high-volume data and data analytics mining techniques so that we can actually get useful information out of all of this. At the same time, we're also seeing a need for securing data collection or for secure data collection, storage, and transmission, things that are really at the heart of the cybersecurity discussion right now. But despite these issues, there's still a lot of good that can come as a result of information technology with respect to decision support tools, optimizing energy consumption, yield, weighing multiple trade-offs, and really taking the burden off of the manufacturing worker and allowing them to spend resources on non-IT related tasks. A second trend that we identified in this report is the increasing role of modeling and simulation. So a lot of you are probably familiar with product and process level simulation and modeling, but there's also a growing use at the plant and supply chain level. So all of these things really have the potential to help reduce time from conception to production and even delivery of a product. And they also help decrease the need for expensive prototyping, a large amount of test coupons, things that can really delay getting a product to market. And overall, modeling and simulation really helps increase efficiency, reduces bottlenecks in the production lines, and importantly, reduces risk, which is a big thing, especially when you consider small businesses who are now only beginning to realize some of the important aspects or are only beginning to get their hands on modeling and simulation tools that were previously just available to the larger companies, places like Ford and Boeing. So a third trend is the rapid changeability across the manufacturing enterprise. And so we use this term to actually encompass things such as flexibility. Flexibility oftentimes just applied to the product level, but also agility of the supply chain. So overall, really an ability to adapt to changing customer needs and changes in the network of manufacturing. So just a couple of examples here. On the top, you see the Invisalign braces, someone holding an example of this. And these are created using a mold of additive that is created by additive manufacturing. And so you see a personalization of products, and this is only just the tip of the iceberg with respect to mass customization. Another example on the bottom, stepping up now to a platform level. This is an example from the Ford Motor Company and the fact that they have a platform that produces 10 different vehicle types. They also have tooling that is common, or 80% of the tooling that's common among models, differing models of their cars. So overall, we're seeing an ability to rapidly adapt to changing customer needs and the ability to produce many products or few products as needed. There's also increasing innovation in supply chain management. The previous paradigm was really to design, build, sell a product within a single country. That's no longer the case. We have increasing globalization and complexity of supply chains. Classic example with the Boeing 787 Dreamliner that had 50 Tier 1 suppliers, a majority of them coming from outside of the country. But they're also a classic example of what can go awry when you don't appropriately manage the supply chain. So you need to be able to have dynamic risk analysis, whether it's internal events to the company or external events, extreme weather events, or political events. There's also a lot of technology that's driving supply chain management. So RFIDs, robotics, and software. You can see an example of this on the right in the Kiva mobile robotic warehouse system. So these shelves are in constant movement in order to try and optimize delivery of a product. And this is something that's really emerged as a result of e-commerce. But they're really trying to efficiently get products to humans that can then pack and ship a product very quickly. So with this, we also see there's continuous feedback and monitoring. And in the end, with supply chain management, all of these things are leading towards more strategic and operational, informed strategic and operational decision making. And the last trend is sustainable manufacturing. And here we use the definition by the Department of Commerce. So it's not sustainable products per se, but the creation of manufactured products using sustainable processes. And just a couple of indicators of the rising global interest in this. You can see on the right there's the OECD Sustainable Manufacturing Toolkit that was recently released, as well as a parallel effort in creating the Sustainable Business Clearinghouse hosted at the ITA website to help businesses determine resources and such that are available to them for implementing sustainable manufacturing. So we saw that this is really driven by an increasing cost of materials and energy. In many cases, sustainability just began making sense for companies. And though we did see cases where sustainability was used as a marketing tool, it was not a primary driver. So sewing all of these ideas together, this is our picture of the advanced manufacturing enterprise. So our 5 converging trends here, the 2 that are particularly feeding into the factory or the supply chain and modeling and simulation. This goes into what we've termed the smart factory, borrowing from previous reports. But downstream, there's also important needs that have to be considered in terms of distribution as well as customer demands. And overarching concepts of IT, sustainability, and changeability are present throughout this diagram. So I hope I was able to paint a little bit of a picture of the changing state of manufacturing, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris Weber to talk more about some of the factors for success regionally.
Thanks. So as Justin said, he spent most of his time talking about these converging global trends that we identified in the report. But we also realized very early that local and regional factors are incredibly important for looking at the overall picture of advanced manufacturing as well. And that is because if you really want to know about what the national security, economic security impacts of advanced manufacturing are, you have to know where it is occurring. And where it is occurring is going to be a function of these, what we have termed enabling factors, sometimes called location factors in economics. So in this section of the report, we examined a whole series of these different location factors and tried to figure out, what are the most important ones for the future of advanced manufacturing. So there's this large literature, mostly called economic geography. There's a few other terms that go around, but basically this is the study of why firms choose to locate where they do. And there is a whole bunch of different factors that go into this location decision. A lot of different people have studied this for a while, particularly since the rise of globalization. And there's a whole bunch of different economic models of how this decision happens. A lot of these models come to very conflicting results, though. So one of the interesting things that people have now tried to do is just trying to go out and take a very large sample of business leaders and ask them, how do you actually think about where do you locate your next factory? So there are these new global surveys that hopefully are starting to elucidate these factors and how important each one of them are. They haven't gotten there yet, as we'll see. And the other thing to note is that countries, of course, try to increase their competitiveness by changing some of these factors where they can be changed. Not all of them can be changed, of course, but where they can be changed, countries try and do that. So we investigated 3 different ones of these global surveys, and you see the titles across the top there from the different bodies. One is from the UN Conference on Trade and Development. The second is Global Competitiveness Index from the World Economic Forum that is commonly cited. And the third one is from Deloitte, a company. They did a specific manufacturing competitiveness index a couple years back. And we detailed through all these different factors and tried to group them where we could, because everybody uses a different taxonomy, of course, and tries to talk about different things being more important or less important. So we put these 3 together into a common scheme that you see over on the left there, that really speaks to the heart of what are these factors that affect how a company makes the location decisions that they make. Now, what we'd love to do, of course, is to be able to rank these factors in terms of importance and figure out what are the most important things companies look at. And of course, this is going to vary regionally. It's going to vary by sector. It's probably going to vary actually company to company within a sector. So one of the things we've seen is that these surveys have yielded relatively different rankings in terms of what's actually important. For instance, the UN CTAD report talks about market size and growth being the most important factors, along with co-location effects or agglomeration. And I'm going to go into some of these in more detail in just a couple slides here. Whereas the Deloitte Manufacturing Index basically said that access to skilled labor was really the most important factor that they found, and that labor costs and the regulatory system followed close behind. So it really depends on who you're asking, what you're going to hear about what's most important for these location decisions. But again, most importantly, that we want to point out here is that some of these factors can be affected by policies at the country level and the regional level. Others of them really can't. As much as a politician might want to tell you that they can make the economy grow, that usually is not the case. So the market growth obviously is going to be an external factor. The report again goes through all of these in some level of detail, but we're just going to talk through a few of them today. One of them, this is kind of one of the broadest findings of the economic geography literature, is that firms really prefer to be located together. And this is because supply chains are easier when they're local. First of all, logistics are easier. But what's really good about this is that you get what are termed knowledge spillovers. You can have one company being able to gain knowledge from another company if they can, get workers who previously worked at one of their competitors to switch over to them. Now, this isn't always a good thing. If your company is leading the sector and has the best IP, you don't want to be located with other people. But there, of course, there's only one leader in every sector, and everybody else is trying to catch up. Also, it's important to note that these clustering effects don't have to necessarily occur directly spatially together. Sometimes it might just be enough to be a part of the same free trade agreement or be in the same free trade area as the rest of your supply chain to get around tariffs and other barriers to the supply chain. One of the other factors that consistently comes up when across the different surveys and across the literature is the access to skilled labor. And this was important for traditional manufacturing and is just going to be increasingly important as manufacturing grows to be more and more advanced. Different people talk about this again in different terms. You'll hear labor force, labor skills, education and workforce skills, etc. But again, it's become increasingly clear that this is very important, and it's going to become even more important due to the increased innovation and research and development activity that really defines what advanced manufacturing is. The number of undergraduate degrees in science and engineering is one factor that people trying to use to measure this across countries. It's not a perfect factor, it's a perfect metric, obviously, because the quality of different education systems is very different, and one engineering degree in China might not be worth one engineering degree in the US or the EU. But it's important to note that China has taken the lead in terms of the number of scientists and engineers they graduate, but also in terms of the number of advanced degrees that are graduating. The U.S. is still in the lead on that. So again, it would be great if we could just get a perfect metric of how well the labor force has skills matching the advanced manufacturing sector. But this is really difficult again, and this is due to a whole bunch of different factors. One is, again, as I referenced already, the evolving educational systems in different countries, the quality of education, but also what's being taught as part of the education in different countries. The other thing is that graduating a certain number of scientists, engineers doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stay and work in your country. Immigration and emigration can change this equation quite a bit, and effective immigration policies is one of the things that came up in a lot of the surveys and literature as well. It's also really tough to know how many workers we're going to need for the advanced manufacturing sector over the next 20 years. And this is because of, first of all, productivity gains. You'll see in the chart the percentage of employment across a whole lot of different advanced countries in the manufacturing sector, and it has obviously been in decline ever since 1970 and almost across the board in all of the different countries. And there's a lot of people trying to project how much it will continue to decline, whether it will flatten, whether it might actually turn around at some point. And obviously this is a function of the population structure, what our productivity situation is going to continue to look like moving forward. One other thing that we wanted to talk about today, again, all these other factors are discussed in the report, is this access to natural resources. And this is one thing that is a hot topic and comes up quite a bit, particularly this issue of rare earth elements. But one of the things that we wanted to note, and that the literature has really started to discuss a lot, is that this is really very industry specific. It's probably not broadly important across the whole manufacturing sector, because in general, natural resources are tradable goods. Most of them are global commodities that face a global price where there is a free market. This is not the case for rare earth elements, of course, as I'm sure many people in the audience know, and that's why it has gotten a lot of press. And it's also important to know that price volatility for natural resources can be equally important to actually facing a shortage of the material, because if you're seeing price volatility, it makes it very difficult to plan your supply chain and see standard costs and profits. So I will now introduce Naini Gupta, and she's going to close us out, talk about the future scenarios that we identified.
So the future scenarios that I'm going to talk about are set against the backdrop of the 4 technology areas that we studied. If you recall, we examined advances in 4 technology areas, 2 mature technologies and 2 emerging ones. The mature technologies are semiconductor manufacturing, you see the diagram on the right, and advanced materials. The emerging technologies were additive manufacturing, which is the inkjet deposition diagram on the left, and synthetic biology, where you see the primary structure of the amino acid sequence. So with these technologies as a backdrop, some of the scenarios that we see for looking 10 years out is that advanced manufacturing will become increasingly data intensive and automated. We will see less of a dependence on the labor-intensive mechanical processes of today, and an increasing dependence on intelligent industrial robots who are anticipated to take on more and more decision-making capabilities in their roles on the factory floor. Modeling and simulation techniques, which are today quite intensive in some manufacturing sectors, such as semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and the auto industry, will become more widespread and prevalent in other manufacturing sectors as well. Moving forward, manufacturing systems will be increasingly globally linked by adaptive sensor networks. These sensor networks will become capable of creating intelligent environments using a combination of real-time information combined with rapid analysis and decision-making capabilities. Another point we wanted to make was that countries and companies that invest in cyber and network infrastructure will be well poised to lead in those areas that can exploit the increasing flow of information that we anticipate coming up in the future. manufacturing will become increasingly energy and resource efficient as companies try hard to integrate sustainable practices into their manufacturing, into their enterprises. And this has the advantage, it has several advantages. It reduces costs. It reduces the risk of supply chain threats to the company. It also makes them more appealing to their discerning customers, who will increasingly look towards companies that invest in renewable and recycled materials in their manufacturing. Manufacturing systems will evolve to a stage where they will try to consider the entire life cycle of their inputs and outputs and look at the life cycle effects of the materials that they use in manufacturing. Globally distributed manufacturing systems will increasingly look outward as they seek new ideas for innovation that allow them to respond more rapidly to their customers' needs. Also, mass customization will allow companies to compete more effectively in new and emerging markets. So those are some of the overall enterprise trends that we would see going forward in the 10-year timeline. Looking even beyond at the 20-year time frame, we anticipate seeing a transition from the traditional top-down manufacturing processes of today to bottom-up manufacturing technologies such as atomically precise manufacturing. Semiconductors will move in the direction of mass customization by user-driven programming, and beyond that, we are moved towards a post-CMOS stage where one would expect to see entirely new semiconductor designs and systems. In advanced materials, manufacturers will increasingly utilize advanced and custom designed materials. Additive manufacturing is a technology that has the potential to be disruptive in mainstream manufacturing going forward. And finally, synthetic biology is anticipated to change the face of biological manufacturing as it is today. And with that, I will hand over to our project leader, Stephanie Schick.
So naturally, this all looks like a perfect utopian world in 20 years where advanced technology or advanced manufacturing as we know it today will look completely different. But to get to that point, challenges and barriers do remain. We're just going to run through a few of these. At the forefront of this is always investment funding. Where do you find it? It's becoming increasingly more expensive, and there's been a risk-averse climate, in part due to the recent financial crises. But Chris talked about the knowledge spillovers. That's a good thing when you're looking across society. Oftentimes, though, firms aren't real happy about sharing that knowledge. So there's pros and cons, and you can see both, especially if firms are investing their own funding. It's also, of course, one of the rationales for government investment in advanced manufacturing as well. Importantly, and we've already talked about this, is preparing our students and workers to use a lot of these new tools to be able to not only develop modeling and simulation tools and techniques that will allow our factories and our whole enterprise system to become increasingly automated, but to understand them and to be able to read the data, use it, and make decisions. So we need to see a whole trend starting in the early years of school to be able to use these tools. No longer will we be memorizing our multiplication tables. We're going to be actually having those modeling and simulation tools right on our BlackBerry. There's a need for new regulations as well as we begin to see the role of additive manufacturing emerge and some of the newer areas in synthetic biology. Some of our existing regulations just will not address the issues that are going to arise in terms of safety, in terms of standardization, in terms of just what this advanced manufacturing world will look like. And the same applies to intellectual property regimes starting to head toward more consistency and standards across countries. And then, even though everything looks very fast, and in an IT-driven world, things are fast. In IT, if you don't make it to market within 2 years, it probably won't make it to market. However, it's still going to take a long time to develop materials, even with our new integrated computational materials engineering, even with additive manufacturing. There is still a long lead in this development time. And so we have to take that into account when we're looking toward moving toward advanced manufacturing. So you saw that we were looking on a continuum of looking at scenarios at 10 years out and then 20 years out. It is a continuum, and you might say, well, there were pictures that you showed us of advanced manufacturing today. And we are beginning to see that emerge with large companies. Some of the very large auto companies are beginning to advance in advanced manufacturing, and you see this, but it's not pervasive, it's not widespread. We need to see that being adopted by medium and small companies as well. And so over this continuum of 10 to 20 years, we're going to begin to see this advanced manufacturing evolve. Establishing advanced manufacturing will continue to be a priority for many countries. We definitely see that in developed countries. We see that in China and Japan, in the EU. But we're also seeing it beginning to emerge in the developing countries as well. And finally, not to sound like a broken record, but the science advances in education are going to be needed. They're going to have to look very different than what they do today in order to advance advanced manufacturing. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kent, and he's going to introduce our discussants.
Invite Jim Turner and Carl Dahlman to come up, please. Well, let me say, I think Thomas Jefferson may have met his match with this terrific presentation. Having had the pleasure of reading an earlier version of the report, it is a treat for all of you who plunge into it. I think you want to, in this case, not just stop at the executive summary, but plunge right through it. Well, we are very fortunate to have two outstanding commentators here. Well, let me get my notes before you tie me down. It's hard to picture a world in which robots are making robots. You're almost into the world of science fiction, I guess. And this question of additive manufacturing and synthetic biology I found particularly challenging and mind-expanding. The challenge of finding, as Stephanie said, a new set of regulations is going to be very challenging for this very new world. Can I go ahead and start introducing these distinguished gentlemen?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Speak up.
We're wired at this point.
Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce, as I said, two outstanding commentators who are deeply engaged in the world of technology and innovation, not only here, but looking broadly across the country and across the world. To your right and my immediate left, I'm delighted to introduce Carl Dahlman, who is an associate professor at Georgetown School of Foreign Service. Prior to that, for many years, he was at the World Bank at a number of senior positions, including the Knowledge for Development program. He has traveled to all the places that I wish I'd had a chance to travel to, and some where I have had the pleasure of traveling. His latest book, his newest book, is The World Under Pressure, How China and India Are Influencing the Global Economy and Environment. And he's continuing to plunge into this subject of innovation systems here and around the world, and how, in fact, they are changing the prospects for growth and development. Further to your right and to his left, delighted to welcome another old friend, Jim Turner. I thought I knew everything about Jim, but in reading his biography, I learned some new things that before he slipped into the world of Hill politics, he worked for the private sector, worked for NASA, worked for the FAA, spent many, many years on the House Science Committee, where he held one senior position after another. And if you go back and look at the legislation that has emerged from the House Science Committee or in which it participated, you will often find the hand and the thinking of one Jim Turner. He is now at the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, where he's continuing to look at the broad spectrum of science and technology policy. Carl, let me start with you. If you could make a few comments on this, and then Jim will ask you to do the same.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I welcome the chance to comment on this excellent report. I went through it. It's a very good report. It has a lot of insight. It was a daunting task. I'm very impressed by how you were able to make it manageable. And I think that the 4 sectors that you picked are very good because they cover a very wide range, from the beginning information technology, which is sort of in the semiconductors, which is more well established and well known, progressively then a bit more far out, and also with big implications, maybe the beginnings of what will be new sort of techno-economic paradigm. So I thought that was very nicely done. And I also think that by comparing also what other countries are doing also adds a lot to it, and there's a lot of material that's been embedded in those cross-country tables. So I thought that it has really given us a feast that we can really begin to take a look at. So I'm looking now in terms of, I'm not going to quibble with the sectors that were chosen. I think they're very good. One could have picked other sectors, but I think these cover a very wide waterfront and give us a very good idea. What I want to focus is a little bit on what does this mean and sort of looking towards the future. I don't know what the terms of reference for the original study were, but here's sort of what I thought. Now that I've seen this, I would like more. And so here's like a research agenda. And so I have six points. The first one is, one of the things that is missing from the report, and I think would be good, although I know it's very hard, is to give some sense of just how big these sectors are already. Okay, now for the first one, semiconductors, is quite easy. It gets more complicated as we go towards the future, but not just to see where they are right now, but where you think they're going to be in 10 and 20 years. And that's in terms of jobs, it's in terms of value added, and also just actual sales. And I think this is important because what you're showing here is this tremendous potential for the technology to change the landscape. And I think that some of the issues that will be coming up is how are this going to affect employment and job prospects. So that's a very hot political issue. And I know it's going to be very hard. But I think then it's very important to embed this not just in their direct contribution, but implicitly in the report, there's a lot of information and a lot could be sort of drawn out a bit more about how they are very strategically important, was one of your criteria, and how they're necessary to sort of integrate back to the rest of the economy. And I think one of the points that came out in the report, but I think could be highlighted more, is this whole thing. Many people talk about manufacturing as obsolete. They're thinking of, the old-fashioned shop floor. You're talking about a completely new, radical shop floor that is moving very quickly, and also the distinction I was mentioned at the beginning between services and manufacturing is getting very blurred, and in fact, it's so highly interdependent, and you need to have a manufacturing sector to be able to do all the other things in the economy. So I think that this is something that could be teased out a bit more in the current report, but also sets up a big agenda, because I know to quantify this, even if it's just illustrated with different scenarios, I think is very important. So I think that's one key area. A second one, and there's quite a bit of this in the report, but I think that in the sort of looking forward, is the U.S. position in all of these areas. And I think that that's very important because looking at the tables and looking at what other countries are doing, as you point out, the U.S. is still very, very, it's still ahead of other countries in the whole semiconductors. But other countries have been catching up very quickly. In the other 3 areas, it's much further ahead. On the other hand, if you take a look at the numbers in terms of the R&D being spent, the numbers of scientists and engineers, the very careful orchestration of massive programs to support all of these areas in other countries, we see that other countries are going to be moving ahead quite quickly. And so that sort of raises the competitive challenge for the U.S. Again, not part of what's in this report, but I think it's very important if we're thinking of this as policymakers and what can be done and what are the levers. And here, in looking at the section on the enabling part, the thing that struck me is, yes, those 3 sort of methodologies and big sort of global surveys of competitiveness both from the World Economic Forum and also from Deloitte and also from UNCTAD, are very useful. But one of the things that I think would really strengthen the report and very important for the future is what is your judgment on how important they are? And it was very noticeable that two of them really didn't cover the market size as fundamental. And I would argue the report basically concluded market size was the most important without sort of making a big deal of it. But I think that's really fundamental. And it's really fundamental looking towards the future, in particular with respect to one country, which I happen to know well, which is China. If you take a look at China, within 5 years, China will be as big as the U.S. if you measure it in terms of purchasing power parity. In less than 10 years, it's going to be as big as the U.S. in nominal exchange rates. And if the size of the market is a big driver for location, and if that you then compound with the fact that China is investing very large amounts in R&D and already has much higher number, not just of undergraduates, but also now of people in math, science, and engineering at the doctorate level, and you take into account that half the students studying in the U.S. or either from China or from India, they have a lot of really very critical mass. So if you just fast forward a little bit, you see we're going to get tremendous competition. And I think that that's very important to sort of tease out and to bring to attention. And then if that is the case, the fourth area is what does the U.S. need to do to respond? And I think that that's fundamentally what many of us here in Washington, policymakers, and also in firms are very, very concerned about. And here we see that, and the report was quite clear on this, I would just amplify it even more. The real competition is going to come in the ability to use all of these technologies. And that goes to STEM, but also goes to what's done in higher education and the critical mass in those areas. And if other countries are investing more massively, already have more people in this area, then we're facing a really big challenge. And also we have a tendency that many people don't go into math, science, and engineering here in the U.S. because they're considered more difficult and they've had better alternatives. That's a big issue. And that requires some very careful thought on how we can try to get more of those people. And it also ties into the whole immigration, which the report did touch on. The U.S. has benefited very much by being able to attract some of the best and the brightest of the world, including many students from other countries who then stay here. But they're beginning to sort of go back, especially from China and India, because they're finding very good opportunities. So we're not being able to capture that global talent as effectively as we were doing before. And I had the privilege this summer of doing some interviews for some really high-tech U.S. firms in China. And three things really struck me very much about. They're putting a lot more R&D into China. And I said, well, that's very interesting. Why is that? It's, you got the quality science and engineers, you have the infrastructures being built up, and all that. But they said, look, part of why we're doing this is because we are having trouble replacing our retiring technical personnel. And where we're finding the numbers that we need is in China, more than in India. And of course, the overall quality is not up to the U.S. level, but if you take the fact that they have 7 times more graduates, they say in those numbers we're finding the kind of people. So I thought that was very important to them. The second thing that they said is, so I said, oh, so you get a pick of the market. And they said, well, not anymore. Because now a lot of them are actually going to work, the best candidates are going to work for Chinese state-owned enterprises and another. And I said, what's the other? They said, they're starting off to work on their own. They're new high-tech startups. And that's a level of tremendous maturity. So I thought this human capital element is really fundamental, and I think that we really have to pay attention to that, see how we can scale that up. Now, a fourth area, and there is mention of this in the report, but I think, especially from seeing who's the sponsor, I would like to see much more on the national security implications of all of this. And this has at least 2 very important dimensions. One of the dimensions, of course, is that if you have a very sophisticated, advanced manufacturing sector, which is now globally distributed, and I really like the fact that the report emphasized that we're really talking about a global system. It really is a global system. But if you have that, then you have all kinds of concerns, and the report does mention this, about all kinds of fake things which are being put into the system, the reliability of the parts, how do you control that? And beyond that, the whole issue of cybersecurity, because all of this is basically driven by cyber, right? Everything that you can do with ICT. And I think that's fundamental. And so I think that we really have to focus on the cybersecurity implications of all of this for this system. Now, a more complicated area, and this I tread on very lightly, but going back to the summary of the enabling conditions, if the market is the biggest determinant of where firms locate, and right now we have a case where you look at 50% of all global GDP growth is based in China. So the market there is just enchanting for the multinational corporations. So what are they doing? They're putting more and more capability into China. And it's not just research and production, but central corporate functions. So in a way, they're going native on us. They're going native to where the market is more important. And if you add back to that the whole issue of China being bigger than the U.S. within 5 to 10 years, this is going to accelerate that pressure. So we have to see what can be done. Now, we can't put the rules and regulations on the multinationals. They just go away faster. So where we have to go is go back to look at the enabling environment. And here I have a little bit of a quibble with the comment that you can't change the market size and growth. Because I think part of the problem is, and I'll be very, very frank, I've worked in all the big countries and developing countries. The U.S. now looks a little bit like a banana republic in the sense that we're having a lot of trouble with the very basic environment, which is important for investment. You know, we don't know what the regulations are going to be. We don't know what the taxes are going to be. We have all this tremendous overhang of the fiscal deficit. Are our accounts going to work out? We look like a Latin American country used to look 20 years ago. And if you then ask the big multinationals, well, they're not investing here. They're investing elsewhere because they don't see the potential here. Well, that's fundamental. And we need to do something about that because that's at the essence of competitiveness, and that's what's driving this. So I think that's very, very important. And then there's the last point I want to make is that we can see from how you've struggled in the report to put together some of these numbers. There is a very important need to strengthen the kind of data that we collect, not just on what we do here, but what other countries do. We need this. We need to be more informed about what's going on so we can make better policy decisions. So just to summarize, I think the report is fantastic. It's chosen 4 sectors very, very, very well. It gave us, through that, a tremendous perspective of where we're at now, what's likely to be coming down in the future. It's a new ball game. It's got radical implications. And one of the things I didn't mention, which was mentioned before, I want to emphasize too, is the whole issue of the regulations. That's going to be extremely important, in particular in the whole synthetic biology area, because when you begin to engineer new life forms and all that, boy, you're raising moral issues, you're raising competitiveness issues, you're raising all kinds of really fundamental issues. So anyway, we've been given a fantastic set of issues, really nicely summarized. They give us tremendous perspective, and that lays a very fertile agenda for all kinds of follow-up work, including a lot more research and including data needs and then the analysis of that. So thank you very much.
And Sally and Stephanie, we will welcome you back for that follow-on report that has just been laid out for us. Jim.
Well, I'll give you a few more chapters of the follow-on report then, I guess. I just wanted to respond to one or two things that Carl said and then go on to what I was going to say. Although it's going to be pretty tough it's such a wide-ranging report, wide-ranging comments, figuring out how to do everything in 5 to 7 minutes. One thing I think that's very, very important to remember is that in 2022 and 2032, the 2 years we're signaling out in this report, we're competing with the China and the India of 2022 and 2032. We've talked about all the positive things that are happening in those countries. We haven't talked about demographics, and I think if you look at the trajectories for India and for China, it's very, very different. If you look at the United States, 1968 was the peak year in terms of success for college graduates, and it's because it's the year that the first sons and first daughters of the returning people in World War II peaked. It's probably a peak year for only children also. China is already coming very close to its peak people. It's only children who often perform better than average children because so much pressure is put on only children. There are going to be less and less of them as we go on, and by 2032, the demographics of China will be much different than it is today. and India will clearly be much different than it is today. In terms, there's another important place that I think that the demographics plays, and that is in terms of natural resources. If you look at China plus India, there are over 1 billion people at subsistence level right now, $2 a day or less in terms of income. If you look at what happened to Taiwan in 20 years, you went from people like that to people who were upper middle class. If you look at how dramatically the middle class has expanded in China, and if that's the same thing happens to India over the next 20 years, I think all bets are off on natural resources. We're already seeing pressure from China's development on oil prices in this country. We're seeing pressure in critical minerals, but I think there'll be a lot more natural resources that will be under pressure if, in fact, the world, and it's not just these two countries, those are the biggest, but middle class could be growing in a lot of countries, and that means that it's going to be very, very hard to live like Americans and for everybody. And I think that will mean is that in a way we're both moving towards bicycles. Bicycles will be riding because we can't afford the oil and gas, and they'll be riding them because that's the step up to the middle class. Let me just try to go real quick through the points that I was going to make. I think mass customization is a very interesting word because it seems like a combination of mass production and customization. And those, if you think about it, are long-term traditions in this country. My great-uncle started a museum in Ontario that was a customization museum. It was the farm implements of the pioneers, which was his habit of collecting, and his house was just full of them. And he basically gave them to the province of Ontario, and they made a museum out of them. So even from the pioneer days, customization has been a big thing. Mass production is the sort of the tail end of cheaper, better, and I don't think either one is going to go away. I would think mass customization is sort of the next step of machine tools and so on in the customization part of the economy. But we'll still have the need to for the Chinese over a weekend to make 2 million iPads when the next generation comes out. The next thing is cost in mass production is the name of the game, and that affects a lot of the things that were in what we were talking about, including the how fast the new technologies will go to market. It also affects U.S. competitiveness because what I would say equate. I wouldn't use the banana republic. What I would say
that's a little extreme. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I would say, since we're at the end of basketball season, it's a scholarship team playing against a non-scholarship team. That for some reason we assume that if other countries are willing to pay their teams, pay them well, and give them everything they need, that we're going to take advantage of our American whatever that the Republican candidates are talking about, the exceptionalism. That's going to carry the day for us. To me, when it's such a cost-competitive manufacturing is such a cost-competitive industry, I would bet on subsidies every day, and we need to. I think we really need to address that. Next thing, 10 and 20-year time horizons are very, very different horizons, and I think that was great that you picked those. 10 years is the tail end of what we're working on today. If you look at the chips that are in the beginning of the development stage right now, it's the ones that will be marketed in 2020. It's the end of your CMOS range that you're talking about. So we can see there. What we can't see is 2032. And I think one real reason is that it's the application that's harder to see. The world is changing so much in how we relate to each other. We have Moore's Law, but we also have the web, we have cloud computing, we have apps, we have data mining, we have social media, all these things that are changing the way that we relate to each other. We do work, the customers relate to businesses. And if you can tell me how that's going to be in 20 years from now, I could probably tell you what the hardware is going to be in a lot of the new projects. It's what the President Patel called the second invention. Inventing the hardware is the easy thing. Inventing the use is much harder and much less likely to be able to predict. I like the idea that sensors were mentioned. I think that's absolutely key. But if you consider, I think that one thing that I didn't see in there that I think will be more and more evident as we go on, at least in mass-produced products and in the larger products. And I consider one kind of manufacturing to be construction. And it's just getting closer and closer. And construction is moving. 20 years from now is going to be in the factory, to much more than stick-built construction. The cost pressures are going to mean that, and raw materials pressures are going to mean we can't throw things away as much. So what happens with computers and you're being able to swap out the RAM or upgrade the monitor or whatever and keep other systems is going to happen in a lot more products. So I would think that we're going to have things that we have to care for over a lifetime. Also, the movement towards performance-based products, which is essential to sustainability you're talking about, that obviously means sensors, embedded computer power, and as I think Cantor was talking about, the ability of products to heal themselves and robots to make themselves and so on. Now, I've done that one. I think I've done that. Now, how do we get back in the game? I think is the other thing that I can say, but I certainly couldn't put in a report, and certainly not in a government report. There's the Lake Wobegon effect that you're never going to get over, but I can that I can debunk a little bit. First, we got to really know the competition better. I've had the pleasure of traveling with Carl to India. I've been to China, most of these countries, and it's just overwhelming when you see the technology parks and how they are doing. The government and universities and the manufacturers are working together to make sure everything works right. We just have to. That's one place where we just absolutely have to understand best practices around the world and move to do it. I think that one thing that we clearly need to do is to understand that Lean Six Sigma and total quality management are the common language of business. They also have to be the common language of our government to the extent it deals with business, and our universities to the extent that they want to be just-in-time suppliers of technological solutions to companies. There's no other way, and our overseas competition are doing a variation on that. I agree on immigration, education, all the other things that are elements of building the social capital, and I may be the world's biggest standards freak, but I won't go into a whole lot of detail on that. But voluntary consensus standards really, to a large extent, have to be embedded more and more in regulation and replace regulation, because that's a tremendous competitive advantage to the United States. We have the most robust standards in the world. Industry has a huge say in developing, but consumers and others do as well. And to the extent that we have a consensus product where the problems have been thought out in advance, it's a whole lot better than the rest of the world's top-down approach, and that is really a competitive advantage if we can get a lot of the other unlevel playing field, the ones that can be changed in our favor. Other thing that I think is absolutely clear is when we're talking, there are some things that are not going to go away, and that is the IP problems, computer security problems, all those kind of things that plague some of the overseas people. And that means that what it means to me is that if we can put a team on the field and really try to match the competition, that to a certain extent that some of the problems are going to start solving themselves, because the enemy of worldwide supply chains will be distance, time, transportation costs, the difficulty getting products into markets, and as everything else is commoditized and labor becomes less of a factor in products, proximity to market is absolutely going to become a bigger key, and things will start moving our way. We can already see some manufacturing moving back for that reason, but I think that accelerates. And I guess that's what I would say at this point.
Well, thank you both. Very stimulating thoughts and some warnings about, I would say, America's future. Well, let me please open it up to questions. If you could, first, the gentleman in the back, and if you could identify yourself, and the gentleman over here. And wait for the microphone, if you would, please.
Hi, Richard McCormack from Manufacturing and Technology News. I didn't hear any discussion about the national security implications. Can you go into those? And are there any concrete proposals that are put forth in the report?
Stephanie, why don't we turn to you?
I think we addressed the national security more from the perspective of economic security. And we did in the semiconductor chapter in particular, but also in the additive manufacturing, we did look at national security concerns and abilities or opportunities for those technologies to address national security. What was your second question? It was concrete. Oh, so we did not make direct recommendations in the report, but in each chapter and in the summaries to each chapter, we identified challenges and barriers, which by implication can become recommendations to an extent. In our summary and conclusions, we were trying to look at being forward-looking and looking at some of the issues that I think Carl and Jim pointed out very well. For example, I think our report sets the stage about the breadth of advanced manufacturing, and going forward, we really would like to look at this interplay of advanced manufacturing, as Sal said, is not just the factory floor, but really it has a much broader impact when you're looking across. It's complementary to the service sector. It's much broader than just looking at the factory floor. So
you mentioned counterfeiting.
We did. We talked about that. I mean, there's a lot in the report, and the technology chapters, and I actually meant to say this in my conclusions, go into a lot of depth about not just what the U.S. is doing, but what other countries are doing as well. And that really probably did not come out as clear today. So I'd encourage everyone. In the report, Chapter 3 is a summary of the 4 technology areas, and it does identify these national security and economic security concerns, and it also does set forth a lot of the challenges and barriers as well. And then there's 4 very long appendix chapters that focus on each of the technology areas, just in case you didn't get enough in the summary chapters. So.
And Richard, this report was requested by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which I think was a way of recognizing how critical the whole industrial substructure or industrial structure, as you have often written, is important not only to our economic future but to our national security.
Was there any discussion about the impact of the trade deficit on economic security, much less national security? Did you look at the trade deficit numbers, the trends in trade deficit numbers, projecting those out for high-tech and advanced technology goods?
We did not really touch on trade. What we touched on was building a strong advanced manufacturing sector and what other countries are doing and their best practices. And by implication, then that leads to a stronger, your markets become similar to Germany. You build very strong advanced manufacturing products, and the rest of the world wants them. But we did not directly focus on trade.
The gentleman over here to the...
James Sang. I was wondering whether you have any ideas about what scale effects for the three emerging manufacturing technologies you talked about are. The semiconductor industry, of course, as you point out in your report, there are about 100 fabs total. And to succeed, you need to be very big, which takes a lot of money up front and stuff like that. Things like additive manufacturing, you can buy a $1,000 thing, but my suspicion is probably you're not going to make money in the future. So does anybody have any ideas as to what scale effects for advanced materials, additive manufacturing, biotech are? Are you going to have $10 billion factories or nothing?
I focused on the advanced materials chapter, so I can speak to that. I mean, it's something that can affect the entire industry as a whole, so it's very difficult to, especially at this point, since we're still in what would be probably considered infant stages of integrated computational materials engineering, which was really the focus of this report. So, I mean, advanced materials as a whole, you're talking about metals, ceramics, polymers, really across the gamut. So hard to make a concrete assumption there. In the case of additive manufacturing, I mean, reports that we were looking at, I think something along the lines of $1.2 billion industries when you consider equipment, materials, services related to additive manufacturing. That was in 2010, but it's on the rise.
So, and Nayani, do you want to add on to that for semiconductors?
Oh, I think you started with semiconductors being the...
Okay.
Yeah. Just to get more in detail about what you said on the additive machines, the industry is now kind of seeing this big bifurcation between the $1,000 machines, which you were talking about, and the traditional 50 to 500K machines that are really being used for rapid prototyping and direct part production. As of now, I would probably agree there's not great ways to make money at using a $1,000 machine at home, but that's quickly changing. There's a lot of really innovative models online. Shapeways is a really cool website that you should check out if you're interested in this. People can upload their digital designs, request customizations, buy the digital designs, either download them themselves and print them at home, or request Shapeways to print them themselves and ship them. So there's a lot of cool, innovative models there.
The gentleman here and then the gentleman right next to him.
Hi, my name is Fred Stahl. I'm an author. You had 3 or 4 words about high-performance workforce. As I looked at the report, maybe I missed it, there wasn't an awful lot more than a cursory treatment of high-performance work organizations, worker engagement, worker leadership. That's a fast-changing field. Is that not one that you found much in the way it was relevant to the technology side?
Listen to the gentleman next to you there.
Sure.
Why don't we'll let them answer that question, then go to yours.
So we think that's very technically relevant, but we really were focusing on technology areas and how that will play out in terms of shaping advanced manufacturing. And so by implication, again, every single one of the challenges in every single sector really focused on the need for an educated workforce that can use these new tools and techniques. But again, it was really more as one of the recommendations that fell out of focusing on the technology areas. So definitely an important area, one that we actually have studied quite a bit at STIPI, and we will continue to study, and I think is being picked up as well by PCAST and the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership as well.
Right. There'll be some reports coming out shortly that will give a lot more detail about what this high-performance workforce needs to begin to look at. But one of the things that's really difficult is a lot of the work and reports that are coming out are looking maybe 5 years out. But if you really start to spin it out to 10 and 20 years and ask yourself, the students that are in school today, what do they need to know in 10 years or 20 years? It's really not that far. But there needs to be a lot more discussion on that. But we do see some current reports coming out that will be hitting on that topic. Might be good for this forum.
Yes, and in fact, we, the Wilson Center, are very focused on STEM education, doing a lot in that field. And for those of you who want to feel that something's going right in the country, I urge you to go on Friday and Saturday to the Washington, D.C. First Robotics Competition. This is designed to get young people excited about math and science, and you will see a wonderful group of young people who, if you walk around the pits and you're not an engineer, as I am not, they will just knock your socks off in terms of the excitement and the knowledge and their ability to work as a team and their ability to focus on the future. So we need a lot of work to do, but there are some things that are really looking to that future. It's going to be at the D.C. Convention Center. Sir.
Hi, I'm Mike Bush. I'm a student at George Washington studying international science technology policy. I think the jury's still out on whether or not the country needs manufacturing from an innovation standpoint. Can we still maintain innovative capacity without manufacturing? With the report, there was a lot of discussion of integrating information technology and then modeling and simulation into the manufacturing process. Do you think that gets us further towards a conclusion? Can we use information technology and modeling and simulation in the supply chain to maintain innovative capacity while keeping manufacturing offshore?
Nayani, go.
Hi. So to answer your question, we did talk about a couple of sectors where the modeling and simulation is very mature, and then a couple of sectors which hopefully will emerge with the aid of sophisticated modeling and simulation. We spoke to a lot of people, and the consensus was, if you don't tinker, you can't build, and if you don't know how to build, it's hard to simulate. So modeling and simulation is, in a way, it's divorced from the actual manufacturing floor, but the sort of the knowledge base that flows from the planning and the prototyping stage to designing the process and the entire manufacturing floor, it has to be, the knowledge base has to sort of transcend the theory and the practical. You have to get your hands dirty to understand what it is that you need to model and simulate. So it's not going to be easy to maintain top-notch modeling and simulation capability if the entire manufacturing is overseas. That was what we heard.
Carl and Jim, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I'd just like to add that, there's also the security angle. Even if you don't need it, which I agree very much with what was said, I think you do need the interaction with actual production. But even if you didn't, in this very complicated and uncertain and unstable world right now, I wouldn't want to rely on having a lot of very critical things being done halfway around the world where I might be confronting that supplier.
Jim, anything?
On the additive processes and machines, one thing that occurred to me is that in terms of sort of pre-engineering education, that takes us back to a time when you could, if you had a radio or a clock or something, you could take it apart and see what it was. I think it's a way to teach people once again to work with their hands, and I hope that a lot of the $1,000 machines end up in the schools as well.
The lady in the back, I'm sorry, did you have something?
I was just saying that they already are showing up in the schools, and it's a phenomenal change in what the students can do.
Hi, I'm Mary Potter, and I work for the Census Bureau in the Manufacturing and Construction Division. And I was just wondering, what kind of data did you feel like you were lacking, or was there a big gap in the data that you wish you would have had?
So I'd say number one would be, it would just be great if there could be a manufacturing center that would bring together all these data and help users so that when you're looking at manufacturing and employment, you don't have to figure out which of the 3 or 4 measures is the right one to use at that time. I think in terms of looking at the flows, and we're just beginning to look at some of the input-output tables, and we know that they're there, but trying to understand, again, the breadth of advanced manufacturing and the fact that it has impact across many, many other sectors. We know those data are there, but just being able to access them. And truth be told, once we figured out getting through the Census Bureau, and I'll have to truth, and I worked at the Census Bureau, so I, can point fingers at myself. Just being able to work through, I know a few times, depending on which website you'll pull up, the estimates vary because you'll have preliminary estimates on one, and you'll have more refined estimates. And then moving forward, just being perhaps more open to some of the definitional changes and being willing to experiment. And I do realize the difference between when you're looking at Bureau of Labor Statistics that have national indicators, they have to be much more conservative. The Census Bureau has a little more luxury in probably being a bit more experimental. And so we want to come talk to you, and you come talk to us as well.
So, gentlemen, we'll make this the last question.
Thank you very much. I came from California, so it was a rather long trip. Marek Samoty, I am Technical Executive at Electric Power Research Institute. Sister organization for those from DC know it's Edison Electric Institute. We are representing technology, and you don't know what a wonderful report you put together, and I would like to tell you why, because you gave us great insight into one thing. Of course, being from California, from a country of wine, fruits, and nuts, I may have very limited perspective on a number of things. However, when we are talking about semiconductor industry, we spent 5 years working with semiconductor industry from Oregon, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, with utilities to set up the standard for quality of power delivered to these facilities. I like your report because you did not cover what we would like to cover. And we will make our report available to Woodrow Wilson International Center at Novi, because we are talking about smart factory. How that smart factory is going to be connected to smart grid. We are all talking about, starting from President Obama all the way to every electric utility, because we may have the best manufacturing process. If there is a small blimp on a sine wave, everything goes down. So Professor Dammer said about infrastructure. That's the word which we need to look into advanced manufacturing. Is adequate infrastructure to support advanced manufacturing? So we are going to work on this because electric utilities are extremely interested in what kind of new requirements are going to be put on electric utilities worldwide to be a partner for those who are going to make advanced manufacturing reality. Thank you for your time.
When you're ready with that report, we'd be delighted to discuss it with you here. Well, I want to just say a word before I announce the actual witching hour here, that we have some sad and joyous news. We're going to lose Sally Keller. She's been lured north of the border to the University of Waterloo. One of her two choices she said she might be tempted by, and then, in fact, was tempted. But I wanted to give her a chance both to just perhaps reflect and then introduce her successor who was with us today, and as well as thanking the ODNI who really is, in the end, helped get this whole project going.
Well, I think you can tell based on the folks you heard from today and the ones you didn't get to hear from that it's really bittersweet. This is an incredibly talented set of researchers at the Science and Technology Policy Institute. And I'm also extremely grateful to Larry Gershwin, who has many titles, not the least of which is the Science and Tech Director for the National Intelligence Council, and Frank Gotts, his detail from Los Alamos, soon to leave, who's really helped us. That they really took a chance on broadening the base of people that they work with to try to expand these horizons to learn what they can learn. And you've now heard a whole host of things that would be useful to follow up in this particular study. So it's been a great, it's just been a thrill to have the freedom to do this work for you, Larry and Frank. We really appreciate that. And I am excited to be turning my institute over to the very capable hands of Dr. Mark Lewis, who many of you may know as the former chief scientist for the Air Force and currently the Department Chair of Aerospace at University of Maryland. He's not unknown to this topic or to these parts, and he will have the great privilege of taking the Institute into the next phases of their studies.
Thank you. We'll look forward to working with you both in the future. And let me thank an outstanding group of researchers. I can only second what Sally said. And, of course, the two ladies who twisted my arm to get me to read this report, which turned out to be a real labor of love. And to thank two outstanding commentators who are themselves, I would say, warriors in building an American future. Please join me in a round of applause for this outstanding group.